Hi, readers. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Dragons and Spaceships. I am your host, Brandi, and I'm so happy you're here. This podcast is all about stories that stick with us, whether they are filled with magic, space travel, or just very real human emotions that completely wreck us. And for this episode, I wanted to start with a book that does exactly that. Today's featured read is If I Only Had Told Her by Laura Nolan. If you have read If He Had Been With Me, you might think you know the story. But this book asks us to look again, from new angles and with devastating clarity. This is a story about love, regret, and the words we never say. And fair warning, this episode might include spoilers. All right, let's dive in. Before we move on, I want to briefly spotlight a book that has become almost legendary in reader spaces, A Little Life by Hania Yanagihara. This novel follows 4 college friends as they build lives in New York, bound together by ambition, loyalty, and love. But at the center of the story is Jude, brilliant, guarded, and carrying unimaginable trauma. Over decades, the book explores friendship, success, addiction, and the long shadow of childhood pain. A Little Life is not an easy read, but it is unforgettable, and it asks us what really means to love someone who believes they are beyond saving. So do yourself a favor and check out this book. Okay, let's talk about If Only again. At its heart, If Only I Had Told Her is a story about almost saying the right thing, almost choosing differently, almost realizing the truth before it's too late. This novel exists in the emotional aftermath of If He Had Been With Me, but instead of retelling the same story, it expands how showing us how deeply perspective changes everything. The setting isn't flashy. There's no fantasy world or futuristic tech here. It's everyday life, school hallways, friendships, family dinners, which somehow makes the emotional impact hit even harder. Because this feels like a story that could happen, and that's what makes it hurt. One of the most powerful things about this book is the shift in point of view. We are given insight into characters who were once the sidelines and suddenly their inner worlds are fully visible. We see how assumptions replace conversations, how love can exist quietly, invisibly, and still be real, and how everyone is carrying something they don't know how to say out loud. What struck me most is how often the characters believe they are protecting each other, when in reality, they're just creating distance. This book doesn't villainize anyone, it simply shows how miscommunication and fear can shape entire lives. There are a few themes in this book that linger long after the final page. There's silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind filled with unsaid truths and swallowed emotions. Second is timing. This book reminds us that timing isn't promised. Waiting for the right moment can mean missing it entirely. And finally, regret. Not just grief over loss, but grief over possibility, over what might have been if someone had just been brave enough to speak. Laura Nolan captures the ache of hindsight so well because once you see the truth, there's no unseeing it. Laura Nolan's writing is understated in the best way. She doesn't rely on dramatic twists or big speeches. Instead, she lets emotion build slowly through small moments, internal thoughts, and realizations that arrive just a second too late. The prose feels almost intimate, almost confessional, like you're reading something you weren't meant to see. And that quiet delivery, that's what makes the emotional punches land so hard. This book left me with so many questions. Why are we so afraid to say what we feel? How often do we assume someone already knows the truth without ever saying it? And if we know how little time we had, would we choose differently? I'd love to know what this book stirred up for you, which moment hurt the most, and did it make you want to tell someone something you've been holding back? But okay, book dragons, for our Dragons Roar this week, let's talk about one of the biggest book-to-screen adaptations buzzing right now, His and Hers by Alice Feeney. This Netflix limited series, which premiered in January 2026, is adapted from the 2020 psychological thriller novel of the same name by Alice Feeney. The story follows Anna, a reporter who returns to her small Georgia hometown after a murder shakes the community and ends up butting heads with her estranged husband, Jack, the lead detective on the case. As they dig deeper, secrets, lies, and conflicting perspectives make everyone a suspect. People are obsessed with this right now, calling it twisty, binge-worthy mystery with strong performances from Tessa, Thompson, and Bernthal at the center of it all. Fans of the book are especially talking about how seeing the story come to life brings even more depth and more questions to the characters. And if you love atmospheric psychological thrillers with unreliable narrators and simmering tension, this one adaptation is worth checking out. So if you're looking for a show that mystery lovers everywhere are talking about, that's His and Hers. And it might just make you want to read the original novel next. If Only I Had Told Her is a story about love that exists in quiet spaces and the heartbreak that comes from leaving things unsaid. It's a reminder that words matter, that courage doesn't always look loud, and that sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't what happened, but what never got the chance to. Thank you so much for being here for this episode of Dragons and Spaceships. If you have enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow, share, and join me in next time as we explore more stories that stay with us long after the last page. Until then, keep reading, keep feeling, and may your TBR pile never stop growing.